Hello friends, welcome to African Urban Tales, where stories come alive. Do well to hit that subscription button and turn on notifications bell. Now, relax as we dive into today's story.
George McAllister was a man who radiated success from every pore of his being. At 52 years old, he carried himself with a confidence that many mistook for benevolence. His hair was neatly trimmed and just touched with a handsome hint of silver, a detail that only emphasized his maturity and sophistication. He wore suits tailored to fit his athletic build, and he spoke in a warm, inviting tone that made people, especially his wife Evelyn, feel cherished. To outsiders, he represented the pinnacle of wealth, charm, and virtue. From the day Evelyn had met George, she had been captivated by his air of authority, the sparkle in his eyes, and the gentle way he spoke to her. Their courtship had been swift, filled with grand gestures that included luxurious vacations and candlelit dinners in some of the finest restaurants in the world. He was the sort of man who made problems vanish. If an issue came up with family, friends, or business, George seemed to have a solution within minutes. Evelyn was swept off her feet, believing she had found a partner who would care for her emotionally and financially for the rest of her life. At 35, Evelyn had never tasted a life of such abundance before she met George. She had grown up in a middle-class family where money was sometimes tight. Her parents had instilled in her the value of honesty, loyalty, and hard work. When George proposed, kneeling in a bed of rose petals on the balcony of a high-rise luxury hotel, she had simply melted. Her family, though proud of her engagement, couldn't quite believe just how quickly she had ascended into the world of the elite. Evelyn saw her new life as a fairy tale come true. She imagined that George was her knight in shining armor and that their marriage was a story of destiny. 3 years into the marriage, Evelyn's belief in George's perfection remained steadfast. It wasn't just his wealth, although his bank account funded a life of opulence, but also his persona. In front of her, he never seemed to lose his temper. He appeared to care deeply for her, always making sure she felt safe and loved. If they had disagreements, he smoothed them out with sweet words or, if necessary, extravagant gifts. Their house, a sprawling estate set against lush green lawns, was filled with staff who catered to their every need. Gardeners trimmed the hedges to flawless shapes, drivers polished luxury vehicles until they shone like mirrors, and a few maids rotated on a schedule to keep every inch of the mansion pristine. Underneath this carefully maintained facade, however, lurked a secret. George's so-called virtue was no more than a glossy veneer he had perfected over time. At heart, he was a serial cheater. He had already cheated on Evelyn multiple times with an assortment of women who worked in his offices or who he encountered during business travels. But he was cunning. Aware that his reputation and wealth were bound to Evelyn's good graces, George made every effort to conceal his indiscretions. He took precautions like using special phone numbers, paying for secret hotel stays in cash, and ensuring no direct links were traceable to him. Those who served as silent observers, the staff and certain close business associates, turned a blind eye, largely because they feared George's power. No one dared to confront him. No one wanted to lose their job. And so, the illusion of perfection remained unbroken in Evelyn's eyes. One late evening, after a dinner party in which George had entertained several of his business partners, Evelyn sighed contentedly while stepping into their master bedroom. The room overlooked a vast garden illuminated by soft lights. She sank onto the edge of the bed, recalling how George had just charmed the entire crowd with stories of their upcoming anniversary trip to the Maldives. He had described, in detail, the private beach they would stay on, the candlelit path that would guide them each night to dinner, and how they would toast their love under starry skies. Evelyn felt her heart flutter. She believed she was the luckiest woman in the world. That night, George kissed her forehead gently and whispered, "You'll always be the only one for me." She drifted to sleep, smiling at his sweet words, never imagining they were built on layers of lies. Meanwhile, George lay awake, staring at the ceiling. He recalled the glances he had exchanged with an assistant from the dinner party. It was a fleeting moment, but one that left him wondering if he could arrange a meeting the next time he traveled. A satisfied smirk formed on his lips. He wanted everything: wealth, power, prestige, and the thrill of another conquest. For George, his marriage was simply a means to complete the image of respectability he needed to remain at the pinnacle of his social and professional circles. In this manner, George lived two lives. One was the perfect husband, thoughtful, attentive, and protective toward Evelyn. The other was a manipulative philanderer who wanted nothing more than to indulge his every desire whenever a chance presented itself. He spent his days walking a tightrope between these two personas, determined never to fall off. And as long as Evelyn suspected nothing, the performance would continue seamlessly. Now, Evelyn's trust in George knew no bounds. She spent her days overseeing the household staff, attending charity events, and participating in community engagements that George sponsored in her name. She never once believed he could betray her, for he had given her no reason to doubt. A woman who loved and trusted so completely found no reason to look for deception. In her mind, George was utterly devoted. The illusion of perfection was, for the time being, intact. Soon after the dinner party, Evelyn decided that the large house needed a bit more help. One of the older maids was retiring, and Evelyn wanted to ensure that everything ran smoothly, especially given the numerous social events they hosted. After a recommendation from her friend Sylvia, Evelyn made an appointment to meet a young woman named Lily. When Lily arrived for the interview, Evelyn was immediately struck by her poise. She had expected someone timid and shy, but Lily, though soft-spoken, carried herself with a quiet confidence. She was in her early 20s, with warm brown eyes and sleek hair that she kept neatly tied back. She wore a modest dress, which nonetheless did little to hide her natural beauty. Evelyn felt an instant liking toward her. She believed it was important to have staff who were both courteous and hardworking, but she also sought people she could relate to on a personal level. "Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity," Lily said, her voice trembling slightly. "I promise I'll do my best." Evelyn patted Lily's hand warmly. "I'm sure you'll do wonderfully. We have a big house, so there's always a lot of work to be done. But you won't be alone. We have other maids here, 2 who work during the day shift and 1 who works mostly at night. You'll have your own room in the staff quarters, and I want you to know you can always come to me if you have any concerns." Lily's eyes shone. "That's so kind of you, ma'am. I just want to make a good impression." During the first week of Lily's employment, George barely noticed her. He had been preoccupied with a series of high-stakes meetings and was rarely at home during the day. However, one afternoon, as he strolled into the living room to grab some files he had left behind, he found Lily dusting the mantelpiece. She startled at his presence and nearly dropped the cloth in her hand. "Oh, I'm sorry, sir," Lily said, a hint of fear in her eyes. "I didn't hear you come in." George took a moment to assess her, noticing the smooth curve of her cheek, the gentle line of her jaw, and the grace in her stance. "No need to apologize," he replied, smiling in a way he knew disarmed people. "I came home unexpectedly." From that moment, Lily became more than just another face in the household. George started looking for reasons to stay home, at least for a few hours during the day. He'd claim he needed to handle some urgent calls from his private study, or he'd say he had left important paperwork at the house. In reality, these were just excuses to be around Lily. He'd observe her from a distance, noticing her every movement, the way she tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear, or the slight blush that crept on her face whenever he addressed her. Lily herself was torn. She found George charming, but she was also aware that he was married and her employer. The last thing she wanted was to jeopardize her new position. Despite her uneasiness, she couldn't deny a fascination with him. He seemed so worldly and confident, someone who owned every room he walked into. When Evelyn eventually noticed that George was spending a bit more time at home than usual, she brushed it off as him finally taking a break from his busy schedule. She was pleased they could have more lunches together, and sometimes she would joke about how it was so rare to see him around midday. George, in turn, would smile and say, "You know, my love, sometimes I realize life is too short to waste every minute at the office." Yet in her moments of absent-minded reflection, Evelyn couldn't ignore certain changes around the house. She noticed the staff smiling a bit more nervously, or she caught Lily quickly lowering her gaze whenever Evelyn entered the room. Evelyn dismissed these observations as quirks. Lily was new and probably just adjusting to the household routine. She didn't see any reason to be suspicious. During one lunchtime, Evelyn, George, and Lily crossed paths in the hallway. Evelyn waved casually and said, "George, this is Lily, our new maid. I don't think you two have officially met." George offered Lily a charming grin. "We've bumped into each other a couple of times," he said smoothly. "I'm George. Welcome to the family." There was a moment of awkward silence as Lily nodded, her cheeks flushing a bright pink. After Lily had left to tend to her chores, Evelyn teased, "You seem to have impressed her." She was blushing. George shrugged. "I can't help it if I make a new staff member nervous. I'm the big boss after all." Evelyn laughed, giving him a playful tap on the shoulder, entirely missing the glint in his eyes. The seeds of temptation, however, were already taking root in George's mind. Where Evelyn saw a timid young maid, George envisioned an exciting conquest. And as far as he was concerned, the challenge was half the thrill. In his worldview, he was entitled to anything he wanted. Lily was just the latest of many who had piqued his interest. Over the next few months, the tension in the mansion grew. It was subtle at first, exchanged smiles in hallways, soft murmurs in corners, and small gifts that Lily would find on her bedside table. She was too embarrassed to ask George about them directly, but assumed they came from him, especially since no other staff members appear to have the means or the audacity to leave such expensive tokens. A gold necklace, a pair of pearl earrings, or fragrant bouquets of imported flowers. A part of Lily warned her to keep her distance, but George's charm, combined with his constant attention, chipped away at her defenses. He would find moments to speak to her alone, whispering flattery about her beauty and her kindness. He assured her that no one else understood him the way she did. Lily, young and inexperienced, allowed herself to believe these words. After all, George was powerful, admired by everyone around him, and perhaps, Lily thought, he truly cared for her. She felt special, as though she had been chosen from among many. The affair began quietly, with stolen kisses when no one was looking and hurried embraces behind locked doors whenever Evelyn left the mansion to attend social gatherings. George's strategy was systematic. He would check Evelyn's schedule, noting her next outing for a luncheon or a charity event, and then he would plan accordingly. In these stolen hours, he showered Lily with compliments, telling her she was the only one who made him feel truly alive. Lily, filled with a conflicted mix of guilt and excitement, fell deeper under his spell. It wasn't long before the staff started whispering amongst themselves. A housekeeper noticed Lily slipping out of George's study with disheveled hair. A driver heard rumors that George had been seen giving Lily a ride home in the sleek black sports car he rarely used for anything except personal pleasures. These signs pointed to a scandal, but no one dared speak openly of it to Evelyn, for fear of losing their jobs or incurring George's wrath. Unaware of the full extent of the situation, Evelyn began noticing odd details. For instance, an expensive watch that George claimed he had misplaced was found in Lily's quarters. Lily explained nervously that George had asked her to hold it for him while he tended to a phone call. Evelyn found the explanation plausible, though somewhat strange. Then, there were the subtle changes in Lily's appearance. She began wearing clothes slightly more refined than what might be expected from a simple maid. Evelyn caught glimpses of what looked like a diamond bracelet peeking out from beneath Lily's uniform sleeve. Evelyn had never given Lily any jewelry, and as far as she knew, Lily couldn't afford such things on her own salary. Yet each time Evelyn felt a pang of suspicion, she reminded herself that George was a generous employer and Lily might have inherited a family heirloom. Evelyn had no reason to suspect the unthinkable truth. One afternoon, Evelyn was rearranging some porcelain figurines in the living room. She overheard George talking in low tones on the phone. She didn't catch every word, but phrases like meet you soon, and I'll make sure she's out sent a chill through her. When she asked him later, he casually dismissed it. Just a difficult client, darling, he said, planting a kiss on her forehead. Business never sleeps. At the same time, Lily found herself in a swirl of emotions. Her relationship with George was exhilarating, but she was consumed by guilt at betraying the kind-hearted Evelyn. She dreaded the possibility of being confronted or, worse, of Evelyn discovering the affair on her own. But George, sensing her internal struggles, assured her that they would keep everything hidden. He played on her hopes and fears, telling her that if she wanted a secure future, she should trust him completely. "Nothing will happen to you," he whispered one night, his breath warm on her ear. "We'll keep this between us. I can make your life better than you ever imagined." Lily's decision to continue with the affair was neither purely practical nor purely emotional. It was a combination of longing for a life beyond her humble means and her genuine affection for George, twisted as it might have been. Yet her internal fears began to escalate when, after months of secret rendezvous, she realized she was pregnant. The shock stunned her. She had never intended for things to go that far. She felt nauseated not just by the physical symptoms, but by her mounting dread. She was certain that George, upon hearing the news, would blame her or at least panic, since he was married to Evelyn. When Lily finally worked up the courage to tell George about the pregnancy, he reacted with a mixture of anger and opportunism. At first, he paced around the room, running his hands through his hair, muttering about the mess they were in. Then, he stopped abruptly, focusing on Lily with a cunning stare. "Listen," he said, his voice tense. "We can still control the narrative here. I'll give you money, whatever you need, but you have to do exactly as I say." Lily's eyes brimmed with tears. "I didn't do this alone," she whispered. "I thought you would." "Shoo," George interrupted, pressing his finger to her lips. "Let me think. You'll claim the child is from someone else. Maybe that driver who comes in every day or one of the gardeners. Anyone, just not me. Understand?" Lily shook her head, her heart pounding. "But Evelyn, she'll know the timelines. And the staff, they might suspect." George tightened his jaw. "It doesn't matter. I can cover our tracks. No one will question us if we keep our story straight." He straightened his shoulders, the wheels in his head already spinning. "If you do this, I'll ensure you're well taken care of. You'll never have to worry about anything." Desperate and fearful, Lily nodded, though her conscience screamed at her that this was wrong. Little did either of them suspect that small signs were already drawing Evelyn's attention. She had noticed that Lily was often nauseous in the mornings. She had heard staff murmuring about Lily's odd behavior. She had spotted receipts for pricey items that didn't appear to be for Evelyn herself. Though still in denial, Evelyn felt a pit in her stomach that told her something was very wrong. As the tension escalated, fate intervened in the form of an unexpected return. One evening, Evelyn had been invited to a charity gala across town. She left in a chauffeur-driven car, wearing a dazzling evening gown, fully expecting to stay out until midnight. George had encouraged her to network, saying it would be good for their family's charitable reputation. He himself opted to remain at home, feigning exhaustion from a recent business trip. In truth, he intended to seize the opportunity to be alone with Lily. Their plan was simple. Evelyn would be away for hours, giving them ample time to be together. Lily, however, was growing more apprehensive by the second. Her pregnancy weighed on her mind, as did her fear of hurting Evelyn. But George's insistence and the twisted sense of devotion she felt to him made her stay. That evening, however, the charity gala ended earlier than expected. A storm rolled in, cutting power to the venue and forcing the organizers to end the festivities. Evelyn, disappointed, decided to return home. She told herself she would surprise George, maybe even share a late dinner with him. The drive back felt oddly suspenseful, the thunder in the sky mirroring her internal unrest. She tried to brush off the unease as the effect of a ruined evening. When she arrived, the mansion was eerily quiet. She walked through the front door, greeted half-heartedly by a startled butler who clearly wasn't expecting her for another few hours. Making her way upstairs, She intended to check if George was asleep. The door to their bedroom stood ajar. Soft whispers and hushed laughter drifted out. Cautiously, Evelyn stepped in. What she saw next shattered her world in an instant. George and Lily were in bed together, the sheets disheveled, their expressions frozen in horror as they noticed Evelyn's figure in the doorway. For a moment, no one spoke. Evelyn's breath caught in her throat, and she felt a stabbing pain in her chest. She tried to process the sight of her husband, her perfect husband, lying intimately with the very maid she had invited into their home. Emotions spiraled: betrayal, heartbreak, rage. She took a step back, struggling to regain her composure. Finally, she found her voice, and it shook with fury. "George," she said, her tone cold and seething, "what have you done?" George scrambled to stand, haphazardly throwing on a robe. He opened his mouth to speak, but Lily, in her panic, burst into tears, unable to hide her shame. Evelyn advanced into the room, her gaze shifting between George and Lily. She demanded an explanation, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. George tried to fabricate a story on the spot. "Evelyn, please. It's not what it looks like." Lily was upset, and I was comforting her. Lily interrupted with a sob. "I can't lie anymore. I'm so sorry, Mrs. McAllister. I never wanted to hurt you, but I'm pregnant, and George is the father." Evelyn's eyes widened, hot tears welling in them. "Pregnant?" She spun on George, her fury reaching a boiling point. "Is this true?" George fumbled, his composure evaporating. "It's complicated," he muttered, looking everywhere except into Evelyn's eyes. "Complicated?" Evelyn shouted, her voice echoing through the room. "You have betrayed me in my own home with the maid I hired. And you call this complicated?" George attempted to place a hand on her shoulder, but she recoiled. "Don't you dare touch me," she spat. "I trusted you. I respected you. You've destroyed everything." A storm of accusations, tears, and desperation followed. Evelyn demanded that Lily pack her things and leave immediately. Lily left without argument, quietly sobbing, her world also upended. However, in the midst of all the turmoil, Evelyn's sorrow gave way to a blazing determination. She realized that her entire marriage had been a farce. If George could lie about something so monumental, there was no telling what else he might have hidden from her. "I want a divorce," she said, her tone steady now. "I'll speak to my lawyers in the morning. I won't let you keep lying to me." George's face turned pale. The thought of losing half his fortune and tarnishing his carefully guarded reputation struck him with panic. He reached for Evelyn's hand, but she pulled away, leaving the room and slamming the door behind her. In that moment, he knew he was standing on the precipice of disaster. The days that followed were a flurry of legal maneuvers, emotional confrontations, and revelations. Evelyn filed for divorce, citing George's adultery and citing Lily's pregnancy as the conclusive piece of evidence. With every new document filed, the press latched onto the story, hungry for any detail that would bring down the once celebrated billionaire. Reporters camped outside the mansion's tall iron gates, shouting questions and snapping photographs. George's carefully built empire began to show cracks under the strain of the scandal. Business partners, worried about negative publicity, distanced themselves from George. Clients withdrew contracts, unwilling to be associated with a man who had publicly humiliated his wife and tarnished his own reputation. Stocks in George's holdings started to plummet as faith in his leadership evaporated. Where he once walked with unbreakable confidence, George now found himself dodging reporters, refusing to answer phone calls, and shaking under the weight of potential ruin. Meanwhile, Evelyn held her head high, drawing on the resolve she never knew she had. She was hurt and angry, but she was determined to see that George faced the consequences of his actions. During settlement negotiations, George attempted to downplay his indiscretions, insisting that Lily had seduced him or that the pregnancy might not even be his. But Lily's confession, along with proof of George's lavish gifts and private communications, destroyed his attempts at denial. Evelyn's lawyers were relentless. They produced evidence of George's financial assets, his offshore accounts, and his hidden bank statements. To protect himself, George had always maintained a degree of secrecy, but now that secrecy unraveled in court, the more he struggled, the more damning evidence surfaced. Seeing the inevitable outcome, George tried to negotiate with Evelyn to avoid a prolonged legal battle, but Evelyn refused to settle for anything less than her fair share. Eventually, they reached a settlement that granted Evelyn half of George's fortune and several of his key properties. The day the judge signed the final divorce decree, George felt an agonizing loss of not just money, but also the prestige and comfort he had long taken for granted. Walking out of the courthouse, he was hounded by reporters pointing microphones at him, asking how it felt to lose so much. He had no answers. He pushed past them, feeling an unfamiliar sense of desperation gnawing at his core. Returning to the mansion, a place that no longer felt like home, George found Lily waiting for him in the hallway. She had come in search of support, still pregnant, feeling alone and uncertain about her future. George, however, was consumed by the magnitude of his own losses. He sneered at her. "You realize what you've done, don't you?" he accused. "You destroyed my marriage, ruined my reputation. Now I have nothing." Lily, tears streaming down her cheeks, pleaded for understanding. "You said you'd take care of me. You promised." He snapped. "Those promises are meaningless now. I can barely take care of myself." He shook his head bitterly. "I'm broke. Do you understand that? Even if the settlement leaves me with some money, it's not enough to sustain the life I had. My entire empire is crumbling." Lily realized with horror that his words held more truth than she expected. The business empire was already rumored to be dissolving. George's accounts were frozen pending various investigations. She saw that the man she believed was so powerful and capable was just as vulnerable as anyone else, perhaps even more so, having grown dependent on money and influence. She stepped back, feeling the sting of betrayal in reverse. "What about my baby?" she whispered. "Our child." George turned away, running a hand through his hair. "I have nothing left to give," he replied harshly. "Leave if you want. That's your choice." The cruelty in his voice broke any last shred of hope Lily had that they could fix the situation together. She realized that George saw her as nothing more than a liability now that he had lost his fortune. The illusions of grandeur he had once dangled before her were now shattered, replaced by the harsh truth of his desperation. With her eyes brimming with tears, Lily nodded. She walked out of the mansion, noticing that even the staff who once took her orders now looked at her with disdain or pity. She had lost the promise of a stable future, and she had lost the respect of everyone around her. George, in turn, retreated to a study filled with half-packed boxes, seething at the prospect of beginning life anew with a fraction of the wealth he once possessed. The fallout wasn't just financial. Old business allies turned their backs on him, refusing to answer his calls. Charities he had once flaunted as a testament to his generosity now declined his donations, citing the controversy surrounding his personal life. George's phone vibrated with a constant stream of messages from investors who demanded refunds or threatened lawsuits. Every aspect of his life spiraled out of his control. News outlets gleefully reported the continuing downfall of the once unstoppable billionaire. Headlines read, "Billionaire brought to his knees by scandalous affair. Cheating scandal leads to financial ruin and from high life to no life. The spectacular fall of George McAllister." George felt a combination of anger and shame, recognizing that he had crafted his own downfall through his deceit and arrogance. Months later, George found himself in a small apartment, far from the opulent mansion he once called home. He had managed to salvage enough funds to avoid complete destitution, but the life of endless luxury was gone. He stared at the faded walls, remembering the sparkling marble floors and grand chandeliers he once possessed. His mind drifted to Evelyn, recalling how patient and loving she had been, and how brutally he had betrayed that love. He wondered if she was happier now, free from his lies, perhaps forging a new path or rediscovering her genuine self. In fact, Evelyn was doing exactly that. She had used the settlement money to help her parents retire comfortably and had invested in a few charities that truly mattered to her, ensuring her own financial stability while also pursuing a sense of fulfillment. She had no interest in hearing about George's struggles, as she felt he was simply reaping the consequences of his own sins. For her, the divorce was a liberating end to a painful chapter, and she was eager to move forward without the shadow of George's dishonesty looming over her. Meanwhile, Lily lived quietly in a modest neighborhood, supported by some of the funds she had saved from George's earlier gifts. She planned to raise her child with whatever honest income she could gather, determined not to repeat the mistakes that had led her into George's arms. Though her future was uncertain, she found a small glimmer of hope in starting over, away from a mansion that had been the site of so many secrets and betrayals. George, for his part, sat in solitude, contemplating the chain of events that had brought him from the pinnacle of success to the brink of desperation. He had always believed he was untouchable, that his cunning could shield him from any consequence. But karma, it seemed, had caught up with him. Now he lived day to day, haunted by the memory of what he had lost. One chilly evening, he ventured out to a local grocery store. No longer recognized or respected, he felt invisible among the regular folks pushing their carts down the aisles. In the past, he would never have imagined such an unremarkable life. There were no chauffeurs, no staff to run errands for him. He paid for his items with his dwindling bank balance, feeling a pang of nostalgia for the days when he signed massive checks without a second thought. Outside, the streetlights hummed overhead, and a light drizzle began to fall. George pulled up the collar of his worn jacket, stepping through puddles as he made his way back to his modest one-bedroom apartment. He passed by a billboard showcasing a luxury watch advertisement, reminiscent of the one he had once gifted himself on a whim. He remembered Lily's tearful pleas and Evelyn's heartbroken fury, all bound by his selfish actions. The watch, the mansion, the prestige, none of it felt real anymore. They had transformed into distant memories, reminders of a life he had single-handedly ruined. Word reached him through sporadic gossip that Lily had decided to keep the baby. Evelyn, on the other hand, had traveled overseas to find some peace and possibly start anew. George felt a dull ache in his chest whenever he thought of them both. He told himself he had no one to blame but himself, and yet he still harbored a sense of resentment, unable to fully accept that everything had collapsed due to his own repeated acts of betrayal. Nights were the hardest. In the quiet darkness of his apartment, George stared at the ceiling, replaying every lie he had told to Evelyn, every manipulation he had orchestrated with Lily. He recognized that the illusions he had spun now lay in tatters, leaving him with nothing but regret. At times, he contemplated reaching out, sending Evelyn an apology or trying to help Lily financially, but he knew it was too late for apologies. Both women had moved on, and perhaps he realized that was exactly what he deserved. In the end, George was left with the final lesson that no empire built on deception stands forever. Every lie, every betrayal, eventually meets its reckoning. The illusions George had woven so carefully had unraveled, exposing the emptiness beneath his wealth. With his fortune lost, his reputation ruined, and his closest relationships shattered, he came face to face with the harsh reality that had been waiting for him all along. And so, in that quiet apartment far from the sprawling estates he once inhabited, George McAllister learned the true weight of karma. Once a billionaire who believed himself invincible, he now lived in obscurity, haunted by the ghosts of his own making. His downfall was a testimony to the power of betrayal, the inevitability of consequence, and the enduring strength of truth. The end.